The mysterious disappearance of Susie sparked a series of unexpected twists, with numerous suspects each having their own motive.
Honestly, am I suspect?
Honestly, we have a variety of suspects, and yeah, right now, both you and Brad are.
The investigation was stuck in a dead end until one of the detectives spotted a small clue that helped solve one of the most baffling cases and uncover the truth about what really happened to Susie Casey that night. For 34-year-old Susan Casey, it was just another Friday, though she was eagerly looking forward to the evening after enduring a very painful second divorce. Susie had finally started going on dates again, hoping to find happiness and true love. She was ready for new relationships and a new chapter in her life. She had recently moved to Ponderosa Apartments in Glendive, Montana, with her 4 children. She had a daughter, Maria, and a son, Shay, from her first husband, and 2 daughters, Kiana and Charlie, from her second husband. Like any good mother, Susie loved her children unconditionally and would do anything for them. With her friendly and cheerful nature, she was truly enjoying her new lifestyle. Susie had an interesting and well-paid job as a medical transcriptionist. On Friday, April 11th, Susan Casey headed to her friend's house, promising her children she would be back by midnight. Her oldest daughter, Maria, and her brother, Shay, stayed home alone, while their stepsisters were staying with their biological father, Ted Casey. However, by the next morning, April 12th, Susan still hadn't returned home, and all of Maria's attempts to reach her mother were in vain. Around noon, the worried girl called her grandmother to share the alarming news. Her mother was still missing. Susan was known for being responsible and punctual and never acted like this. She would always call if she was running late. This behavior was unlike her, and everyone, especially the children, feared the worst. Maria and Shay were very scared, so Susan's mother, Marlene, first tried to calm them down and then called Susan's ex-husband, Ted Casey. According to him, after Susan dropped off the kids, he hadn't seen her since the previous evening. With no useful information from Ted, the family went to Susan's apartment and discovered that she had planned to visit her friend, Linda Gay, the night before. Knowing Susan well, her family was certain that she would have come home if she could. Susan was the kind of mother who would never abandon her children under any circumstances. Additionally, her phone was crucial to her, and she never forgot or misplaced it. She would only miss a call in an emergency. Given her silence, it was evident something unexpected had occurred. When the family contacted Linda, they learned that Susan had left her friend's house around 9:30 p.m. to go on a date with her new boyfriend, Brad Holzer. Growing increasingly concerned, Susan's family reached out to Brad to let him know she hadn't returned home the previous night. When asked if he knew where she might be, Brad said he dropped Susan off at her home around 5 a.m., and that was the last time he saw her. With all the information they had, Susan's family reported her disappearance to the authorities. Ty Ulrich was assigned as the lead investigator on the case. His first step was to visit Susan's apartment with a team from the Glendive Police Department. However, their search yielded no clues, so the investigators quickly headed to the other side of town to examine the home of Susan's best friend, Linda Gay. According to Linda, she last saw Susan on the evening of April 11th. That night, Susan had talked a lot about her new boyfriend, enthusiastically sharing how wonderful he was, how well he treated her, and how genuinely happy he made her. After spending a pleasant evening together, the friends parted ways. Susan left around 9:30 p.m. to meet Brad. The police made a logical decision and visited Brad Holzer's home, where they encountered an unexpected surprise. Brad was married with 3 children. He informed the police that he had seen Susie near her home around 5 a.m. According to Brad, if he had indeed dropped Susie off at her home, she would have only had about 20 steps to reach the apartment entrance. The Montana Criminal Investigation Division was called in to assist in the search for evidence. They focused on the area near the Ponderosa Apartments, where 34-year-old Susie Casey lived. Traces suggesting that a body had been dragged were found in a narrow alley near her home. Additionally, numerous shoe prints were found near the shop windows. Despite these findings, the investigation hit a dead end. Unfortunately, Detective Ty Ulrich was unable to locate any witnesses. The investigators then shifted their attention to US Bank, which is located on the same block and on the same side of the street as the Ponderosa Apartments. the bank had an ATM with a surveillance camera installed. The bank manager began reviewing the footage starting from 3:45 a.m. Brad Holzer claimed he had driven Susie home in his silver pickup truck at that time. Unfortunately, the camera didn't capture Susie's apartment entrance, but the recordings showed empty parking spaces opposite the Ponderosa apartments. At 4:52 a.m., the headlights of an unknown vehicle appeared, stopping in front of Susie's apartment. After 27 minutes, the red light turned on, and the vehicle quickly left. Moreover, the pickup truck seen on the recording closely resembled Brad Holzer's truck. Normally, police use surveillance footage to establish direct contact between the victim and the suspect. However, in this case, they found no such evidence. The only footage available to the detectives was of the unknown pickup truck, and it was impossible to confidently identify it as belonging to Holzer. Therefore, Detective Ulrich took a copy of the video and went to the police station for further examination. Meanwhile, law enforcement called Brad Holzer in for a second interview, this time at the station. Brad recounted that he and Susie spent a lovely time near the Yellowstone River, engaging in typical romantic activities. At around 4:30 a.m., when it was already quite late, Brad drove Susie to her home, parking his pickup truck in front of her apartment. They chatted for another 15 to 20 minutes before parting ways.
She got out, walked back to her, across the street to her place like she normally does. I know she was at least halfway across the street when they turned and started backing out, so she was that close to getting into that apartment.
This was the last time Brad saw Susie. Adding to the intrigue, Brad mentioned that the morning before his last meeting with Susie, he received a strange email from Denise Johnson asking, "How's your girlfriend? How does your wife feel about it?"
Still in the dark. Who sent that and who the hell Denise Johnson?
Meanwhile, the surveillance footage from the ATM camera, which had been reviewed earlier by detectives, fully matched Brad's narrative. The video showed his pickup truck parking exactly where he had indicated. However, it was impossible to see if Susan got out of the car on the recording. Detectives could only speculate that she did, crossed the road, and headed towards the entrance of her apartment. Brad also claimed that after dropping off Susan, he went straight home, which was a 5-minute drive away. To confirm this detail, detectives planned to interview Brad's wife, Sam. Unexpectedly, Sam Holzer's interrogation revealed some intriguing details about their happy marriage. It turned out that on the night Susan Casey disappeared, Sam did not spend the night at home. She was with another man and returned home around 6 a.m. Despite living together and having 3 children, Brad and Sam had an unconventional relationship and were not considered a couple. When Sam returned home after her meeting, she found Brad already asleep.
I went in and the bedroom door was closed, and I looked at him, he was in bed sleeping.
This confirmed Brad's alibi. Brad Holzer believed that the person who knew Susan's whereabouts could be her ex-husband, Ted Casey. He was more than convinced that Ted was somehow involved in her disappearance. According to Susan's words, Ted was the type of person who liked to control everything. Their breakup was difficult because Ted didn't want to let her go. On the day of her disappearance, Ted was supposed to look after their children on the day Susan went missing, but the ATM camera footage might provide more information. While the police department carefully examined the recordings for Ted's car, Detective Ty Ulrich called him in for questioning as Susan's ex-husband and a prime suspect.
I dumped a drink on her head, barely slapped her because she threw herself on the ground. I mean, we were both drinking and, didn't mean to, it just happened.
According to Susan's close ones, the reason for her divorce from Ted was his inappropriate behavior. The final straw was when he smashed a cocktail glass over her head one evening at a bar. Susan could no longer tolerate it, as she has long dreamed of divorcing Ted, and finally, she succeeded. The detectives faced a complex situation. They had Susan's jealous ex-husband, who was aware of her new relationship, and on the night she disappeared, he coincidentally drove past her house, adding to the suspicion. Ted explained that he left his daughters with a nanny before heading to work around 6 a.m., passing by the street where Susan lived.
It was by 6 o'clock or, at the very latest, but I was thinking it was like 10 to 6 or something like that when I got there.
His explanation further complicated the situation. Susan's ex-husband, who had potential motives, was driving through the area at the likely time of her disappearance. The detectives started leaning towards Ted as their prime suspect, as the circumstances seemed to point to him. In an effort to confirm Ted's involvement, the detectives meticulously reviewed the video footage. Half an hour after seeing Brad Holzer's departing car, they scrutinized every detail, looking for Ted's vehicle. Finally, at 5:52 a.m., an unknown car was captured on camera passing by Ponderosa Apartments. To confirm or refute the story told by the prime suspect, the detectives went to Ted's workplace. Ted's colleagues confirmed that he arrived at work around 6 a.m. on the day Susan Casey disappeared, corroborating his alibi and clearing him of suspicion. Meanwhile, the family of the missing person was devastated, struggling to cope with the absence of any updates. The disappearance of their loved one was a heavy blow, leaving them unable to sleep or eat, consumed by thoughts of her well-being. Officers at the police station, who were reviewing the ATM surveillance footage, found no other leads. It was evident that after Brad got out of the car, Susan would have had to take approximately 20 steps to reach her home's entrance. This indicated that the perpetrator had been on the street long before Susan arrived, requiring meticulous planning due to the limited time available. Re-examining the footage, a breakthrough finally occurred. One of the officers noticed something at 5:38 a.m., shortly after Brad dropped off Susie. A shadowy figure was seen walking away from her house. A minute later, headlights from a car inside the bank building became visible, followed by an unknown vehicle driving towards Susan's house. 8 minutes later, the same car passed by in the opposite direction. These observations provided two new leads: an unknown person walking at an early hour and an unidentified car passing by the crime scene. Detectives believed these two leads were connected, but the footage's poor quality made it impossible to identify the car's license plate or its driver. Detective Ty Ulrich had to search for new video sources, which he did. Approximately 90 feet from the U.S. Bank was Stockman Bank, equipped with its own surveillance system. On the recording at 5:46 a.m., an unknown car drove away from Susie's house, and at 5:47 a.m., the car passed by Stockman Bank, 190 feet from the bank. The image quality was clear, showing a silver minivan. Around the same time, Susie's family provided the police with a new lead. Her eldest daughter managed to unlock her mother's phone and discovered numerous voicemails, all received at 1:30 a.m.
Please, everybody is very worried about you. Please call me, I'm worried. Please let me know that you're okay.
There were at least 20 messages, further complicating the investigation. However, the voice on the recordings was very familiar to Susie's eldest daughter. It belonged to Marty Larson, her biological father, who, by the way, owned a silver minivan. Susie's first husband became the new prime suspect. Larson lived in Billings, Montana, a 3-hour drive from Susie's house. Local police called him in for questioning.
Can I ask you one question first?
Sure.
Am I under arrest for something?
No.
Am I being charged with something?
No.
Larson confessed that on the night of his ex-wife's disappearance, he was indeed in Glendive, and he even spoke to her.
She said she was going to stay at Linda's for a little while, and she'd give me a call later.
After their conversation, he fell asleep and woke up a couple of hours later, realizing that Susie hadn't called him back. This prompted him to drive to Glendive, to her house.
All right, text.
Okay.
I waited about 15 minutes or so, there was no response. So I called her. There was no response. And then I thought, I'm going to go up there and I'm going to see if she's okay.
Larson claimed he was near Susie's house around 5:15 a.m.
And I went in the building, I went up and I knocked on the door, and hoping, she'd come and tell me she was okay. And there was no answer, so I went out and called and texted a few times, hoping to wake her up.
So did you ever encounter Susie at all?
No.
Okay.
I wish I would have seen her.
He also mentioned that after the supposed meeting, he drove back to Billings, making a stop along the way to refuel his car. At the end of the interrogation, he was asked about his clothing.
Clothing to include jeans, white t-shirt, sweatshirt, Nike, hooded.
These are the shoes I was wearing.
Okay.
I don't know, 9.5, 10, 10.5.
Those new.
New Balance.
His shoe prints did not match those found near Susie's house. The interrogation ended due to a lack of clear evidence linking Larson to the crime, and he was subsequently released.
Oh, Susie, where are you? Where are you? Where are you, honey?
To ensure the validity of Larson's alibi, detectives went to the gas station an hour's drive from Susie Casey's home, where her husband claimed he refueled the car on his way back. The detectives began reviewing the surveillance camera footage from 6:45 a.m., considering the distance from Susan's home to the gas station. Larson should have arrived at approximately the same time. The camera, positioned directly at the gas station, captured a constant stream of cars coming and going. Finally, at 8:15, a silver minivan belonging to Marty Larson appeared. The man got out of the car, inserted the refueling nozzle into the tank, and headed towards the store. The interior cameras clearly showed Larson paying for gas, exiting, returning to his car, and leaving the gas station. Everything seemed to match his statement. Or did it? I wonder if you noticed anything unusual. Following Susan Casey's disappearance, 3 men immediately became suspects at the police department. They were all closely connected to the missing woman and were present at the crime scene around the same time. However, surveillance footage confirmed that none of them were involved. The Glendive law enforcement had never faced such a challenging investigation, but Detective Ulrich did not let go of the last suspect's testimony. Larson arrived at the gas station 2.5 hours after he was recorded by the camera near Susan's apartment. However, Ty Ulrich knew that such a trip should not have taken more than an hour. There was clearly a gap in the man's story. But the main thing that caught the detective's attention was the black sneakers he wore instead of the white ones he claimed to have had on. Did you catch that detail? After analyzing these clues, the police requested a search warrant for Marty Larson's house and silver car. It turned out that the car had recently been meticulously cleaned. There were still traces of condensation on the inside of the windshield, and traces of a brush were also found in the cabin. Despite the thorough cleaning, a piece of evidence survived the wash in the cabin. Remarkably, one piece of evidence survived the cleaning. A single blonde hair approximately 8.5 inches long was found on the back seat. As for the house, a computer was found on which an email was created in the name of Denise Johnson. Larson himself sent this message to Brad, inquiring about how his wife felt about his girlfriend. However, since the authorities did not have a precise location for the missing woman and there was no evidence of her death, they did not have substantial grounds to arrest Larson. 24 days after Susan Casey's disappearance, her lifeless body was found in the Yellowstone River. It was the devastating news the Casey family had dreaded. Their beloved Susan would never come back to them. Susan Casey was found 26 miles from her apartment, along the route Larson took when he stopped to refuel his car. With this discovery, detectives had sufficient evidence to charge Marty Larson in connection with Susan Casey's case. On April 11th, Larson found out that his ex-wife had a new boyfriend named Brad Holzer, so he began surveilling Susie's apartment. That night, he watched the lovers from a corner of a neighboring building that was out of the camera's view. He saw Brad drop off Susie, watched as his car drove away, and Susie went home. Sneaking up on her from behind, Larson grabbed her by the neck, and within minutes, the victim stopped breathing. Dragging her into an alley, he left her lying on the ground and calmly walked back to his car, passing by an ATM. Returning to the alley, Larson pulled his ex-wife into the car and left the crime scene. For reasons not apparent from the record, the state did not bring charges until 4 years after Susie's death. On February 2012, the state charged Larson with deliberate homicide and tampering with evidence. He was arrested in Arizona, where Larson had moved in the fall of 2008. These cases take time, and the state wanted to make sure it got everything exactly right on this one, the judge said. Marty Larson was sentenced in Dawson County District Court to 110 years behind bars.